Richard Skipper celebrates. Every show is a celebration. Each show, Richard delivers the artists you love, showcasing what makes them unique. Never gossipy. The antidote to a sometimes hectic world. Now, here's your host, Richard Skipper.
Happy Saturday, everyone, and welcome to the latest edition of Richard Skipper Celebrates. For those of you who are here for the first time, welcome. For those of you who are returning, thanks for coming back. I'm all about celebrating. I'm about celebrating artists, their body of worth, what makes a great artist. And I am so excited about today's guest. We are going to talk about where we are, where we've been, and where we are headed. And I can't think of anyone better to do this than the one and only Tim Jerome. He's an actor, he's a singer, and he's an arts missionary. And I love that. It's not an arts advocate, an arts missionary. We're going to cover his career. But before we start, Tim, first of all, thank you for being here this afternoon.
Thanks for inviting me.
Thank you. And I want to ask you, how are you doing really in the midst of this crazy world we're in? I will say to everyone that today marks 324 days since our theaters shut down. As I say, the ghost lights burn brightly, not only on those stages, but in our hearts. But how are you doing really in the midst of this crazy world we're in?
Well, I'm playing it very safe. My girlfriend is a doctor, and she lives in Maryland, in Columbia, Maryland. And when this pandemic loomed back in March, April of last year, she said, "You get your butt down here, and we're going to quarantine together." And that's what I did. I got in the car. I live in Yonkers, downtown Yonkers. And I got in the car, put some stuff in the car that I knew I was going to need, drove down here, and I've been here pretty much ever since. I had some things I had to go back to New York for. But generally, I've been spending my time here. And this is a fairly safe community. There's a lake outside where we can walk about a mile and not really run into anybody, have any crowds. So it's a fairly safe neighborhood. And we have to measure our shopping expeditions. But,
expeditions is the right word.
Yes. But you do get the feeling, and I'm sure I'm not alone in this, but that there's an enemy, an invisible enemy camped right outside the front door, and you're going outside and you're going to somewhere. This enemy might just pop up and fill you full of what you don't want.
Well, as we were at a virtual cocktail party together last night, and I mentioned that I just interviewed a wonderful woman by the name of Amy Ostreicher, and she has had some incredible health detours in her life, but her optimism and the way she looks at everything is just amazing. I think of this time that we're going through right now as a pause. It's a pause for us to think about those things that we've had in our lives, where we are, and what we want truly in our lives. I want to ask you, you're very, very busy with Main Street musicals, and we're going to talk about that in a few moments. But what did your calendar look like on March 11th before everything began to go awry, as they say?
Well, I'd been working very, very hard on Main Street projects, and I had been doing a few shows. I did one for Bram Lewis up in South Salem a few months before, called The Color of Light, that Jesse Kornbluth wrote, a play in which he talks about the artist whose name I always forget every time I try to reach out and grab the name. It'll occur to me later. But it was a wonderful play, and I enjoyed doing it, and we had a wonderful time. Henri Matisse is the name of the artist. And I played him in the last years of his life. when he joined up. He was an atheist, but he joined up with a nun and built this wonderful, wonderful church in France, and it's that story that Jesse tells in the play, the wonderful play, and that was basically the last thing I did on the stage.
Out of curiosity, did that experience change him? Did he remain an atheist, or do you know that did it change him in terms of the way he looked at the world?
That's a very interesting question. I played it that he was changed, but what he discovered is the spirituality of the arts.
Mm-hmm.
That art is in and of itself a spiritual tradition. Going all the way back to the Greeks and Romans, they had their gods for the arts. And we don't, we kind of collapsed all those gods into one god. I will confess to you and to your audience that I grew up in a house full of atheists, Jewish atheists. They had, my grandparents were all very devout Jews, but my parents broke from those traditions. And I, though I followed some activities that would please my grandparents, I was left with the idea that there was no God. My parents taught me that there was no God. But when I started getting into the theater, I discovered that there were gods, and that spirit, and that theater is a spiritual tradition.
Now, going back to your parents for a moment, was there a defining moment in their lives that made them break away from the belief of God and in terms of turning atheist?
Well, there might have been. They were not clear about that, particularly to me, but I can tell you that they were very radical left-wing people. My father fought in Spain for the Spanish Civil War, and my mom was a communist until, it became, she never wasn't card carrying, so, it was no big deal back in the day when it wasn't illegal. And I think that it is those political involvements that kind of pull them away from a religious tradition and focus them on something else.
Now, of course, and I'm not going to get political here, but I am going to ask you this. Are you political at all, or have you become an activist either prior to what's been going on over the last 4, 5, 6 years in our lives? Has this shaped who you are today?
Well, I've always been something of a political activist, but mostly I'm involved with the labor movement. Mm-hmm. I'm very proud of the fact that I served on the Equity Council and then the SAG Council, the SAG Board, and also I was, for no particular reason except that there were connections. I was turned out. For a year, I was vice president of the AGMA, American Guild of Musical Artists, which is the opera union.
Right.
I happened to do an opera on Broadway, Baz Luhrmann's La Boheme, and the president of AGMA came to see it, and she kind of dragged me into AGMA. She was a college classmate of mine, mm-hmm. And that's the level at which I get involved politically. I have certainly my political perspectives on what's going on and what I hope to go on in the future. Mm-hmm. I think we turned a corner, and I hope that that the people who are kind of right-wing crazy can sort of stop a moment and listen to what's being done and said, and realize that most of it is to their advantage.
And it's all theater. Think about it. It's all theater.
It's a theater.
And, it's true, but whoever we are based on what we've been taught and what we are taught to believe. And the unfortunate thing is certain people have been taught certain things, and that belief system is so ingrained within them that it's going to be difficult to take that away from them.
I believe
it's the same thing in belief in God and a non-belief in God.
That's right.
It's all a matter of who we are, where we come from. Getting back to your parents again, do you have siblings, brothers, sisters?
I have a brother, 10 years younger than I am. He's an artist. I mean, I can't turn this whole rig around, but I've got one of his paintings hanging up right here. Really wonderful guy, and he's got a lovely family. And although, you know, he's not in the theater, he's not a theater person. I can safely say that.
But do you both have the same disciplines? I mean, you're an artist as well, but do you have the same type of work ethic and discipline in terms of getting your art out there to the masses?
I don't think so. I think that my brother is a family man, and as a matter of fact, I think that that the positions are sort of reversed from the traditional. His wife is the breadwinner, and he is the caregiver. So we have a very different lifestyles.
Now, I know that you were born in Los Angeles.
Yeah.
I want to, and as I do with many of my interviews, I want to go back to the 5-year-old Timothy Jerome. Now, when you were a kid, you don't know him. What were you like as a young child before starting school and peer pressure? If you can take us back to that person.
Well, that's an interesting question. Never expected you to ask me that, Richard. I think I hear the phone ringing.
That's your 5-year-old self calling now.
I was always interested in music. I think I went from one instrument to another instrument, and didn't sing until much later. I mean, sing seriously until much later in high school. Junior high and high school is where I kind of started singing, and then took lessons and stuff like that. But I did study a bunch of instruments, clarinet for a while, and then played viola in the high school orchestra. And then I started singing. But my dad was very influential all through my life. He was a very strong guy. My mother was a dance teacher, and had her own studio, the Lillian Jerome School of Dance. I'm happy to repeat those words, which I probably haven't.
Yes, that's great.
Years. So I grew up next to a dance studio on the one side, and next to an engineering firm, which was called Jerome Underground Transmission Equipment, on the other side.
Wow.
That's high voltage electrical current going underground, which is what happens, you know, when you take those wires from up there and you bury them in the ground, which is much safer. How does that work? Well, I could go on and tell you how it works, but I won't. What I will say is that that he built pumping units for oil insulation that kept those wires safe. And I was going to go into the company. I was going to take over the company. So I went to school my first year in college as an engineering student, and all through high school. And I guess before, my concentration was in math and science. And it didn't touch the heart of me, I guess, which is probably why I can't answer, you know, your wonderful question with stories about.
Well, you did mention that you started singing when you were in high school.
Yeah.
That emotional release of being able to sing, was that something that resonated deep within you in terms of, this is something I would like to do more of, or was it more of a hobby for you?
I think at that time I was encouraged to think of it as a hobby. I think my mother took it a lot more seriously than my dad did, and it was encouraging in that respect. As a matter of fact, it is to her that I owe the shift in my career move, because my dad, when I told him that I was not going to be an engineer and that I was going to go into the theater and sing and this stuff, he said, well, that's fine, but nobody's going to pay for you. I'm not going to pay for your education. Well, I won't tell you what my mother said. But I will tell you that whatever it was she said, it had a dynamic effect on my father, and everything remained the same. And I went to college to study music on his dime.
Mhm.
And he was always, from that moment on, he was very supportive.
Well, did you have the opportunity when you were when you were singing in high school to also act in high school? Were there any theater programs or anything that you were a part of?
Well, interesting you ask. It was a new high school. And a relatively new high school. There was no drama program.
Or was it within Los Angeles or outside of Los
No,
Angeles?
no. But I only was in Los Angeles for 1 year.
Oh, okay.
While my mom and dad worked in the war industry. And then they moved home. Home was New York.
Oh, wow.
My mom was born and grew up in Brooklyn. My dad grew up in Queens. And when we moved back, we moved to Long Island, and we moved all along. We moved to various places along Long Island, and finally stopped, in East Williston, Long Island, and that's where I grew up.
Now, did your parents meet in New York, or did they meet in Los Angeles?
They met in New York. Yeah.
What took them to Los Angeles?
I may have known, but I can't remember where they met.
What took them to Los Angeles?
The war effort. My dad was working in aeronautics.
Mm-hmm.
So he was designing landing gear for these big bombers. And my mom worked in the war office.
Mm-hmm.
She basically was, she was working in a design office, but I don't think she was actually doing designing.
And what was the decision that brought them back to New York?
Well, the war ended. I was born in 43. I was there for a year to the end of 44. And then things started to deteriorate in terms of war preparation, moving forward with any kind of war effort. And they said, well, I guess it's time to go home. And the entire family, nobody came from Los Angeles. The entire family was in New York. So that's where they decided to return, and they did.
And what was the turning point for you that made you decide that you wanted to pursue a career in this business?
Well, I have to say that you asked about high school, and I had been singing in the chorus and doing solos, and I was taking lessons from our vocal music teacher, who was very influential and encouraging, I gotta say. And then there was the senior play, The Man Who Came to Dinner. And I remember the guy who was a student who was casting it and who was intending to direct it, who directed it, I remember the audition. I auditioned. I was just, who cares? I was having fun. And I got cast as Banjo.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Jimmy Durante in the movie, of course.
Right.
Yes.
Tim Jerome at the Wheatley School. And that experience of playing that part was, I guess, to some extent life-changing, because it kind of opened a door and said, gee, I really like this. Well, when's the next show that I can do? There was no drama club. There was no activity. So I went to one of the English teachers and I said, can I start a drama club? Which I did, and produced 3 one-acts. And then I said, I got to study this. So I went to the guidance counselor, and the guidance counselor found me a summer program up at Geneseo. And I went and studied there. I went and learned a little bit about acting there. Wonderful teacher taught that summer course. And then back to engineering, because the next year I was at Cornell as an engineering student.
Now, going back to Banjo and The Man That Came to Dinner,
yeah.
Did you experience at that time any type of stage fright, yes or no? And has there ever been a point in your life where you did experience stage fright?
I think the answer, is no. I never really I felt anticipation and excitement. but I was never afraid to go on stage. And I don't know why I escaped that.
Well, I'm the same way. I've never had stage fright.
Yeah.
And
I
when
understand it, but I've never really experienced stage fright. I've always felt that on stage, there's a certain part of me that comes alive in a way.
There has to come a point early on in your career, and maybe it comes early, maybe it comes later when you get your first professional job.
Yeah.
You know that you said you went back to Cornell and you studied engineering, but when was the point where you felt, I could make a living doing this?
I guess I have to say that I knew that I wanted to be a professional sometime during that freshman year, because all I really wanted to do was do extracurricular theater. I mean, I was in the engineering program, and by the end of first term, I knew that I had to get out. I had to at least have the option. And balancing my concerns about my parents' reaction and my desire to move forward, I went into a division of the college called the unclassified division. I was not in engineering. I was not in arts and science. I was just kind of floating and taking whatever courses I wanted to take. And I ended up taking a lot of, some music courses and a theater course. But unfortunately, or fortunately, I said, well, I could get rid of a requirement if I transferred to the art school. I could get rid of a requirement if I continue my calculus and my chemistry. So I took those two courses and got very low marks at the end of the season, at the end of the year, because I just couldn't concentrate on those subjects. So what happened was they said to me at the end of my freshman year, you have to take a term off and come back and either go back into engineering or take another term in unclassified. So I said, I'll take a term off. Well, I don't have a choice really, but I wanted to stay in Ithaca. I had friends and there was a social life, that I was enjoying. So I thought, I'll go take some courses at Ithaca College. Well, I took 2 music courses. And at the end of 2 weeks, 3 weeks, maybe a month, I said, I'm never going back.
Good for you.
I'm never going back.
No, it's one thing that
when my parents had it out.
Well, it's one thing that your mom, God bless her, Lillian, is it Lillian?
Lillian, yeah.
So it's one thing that Lillian was able to turn your father around in order for him to, as you put it earlier, on his dime, put you through these courses. What was the reaction when you said, no, this is the career path I'm going on?
Well, of course, I was in Ithaca at the time, so I didn't see what went down between my mom and dad.
Okay.
I only heard about it. They both kind of came to me and told me stories. But I understand that my mom said, oh, you will pay for his education like you said you would. And it doesn't matter if he's going to be an engineer or if he's going to be a garbage collector, you're going to pay for his engineering, pay for his college course unless he flunks out. And I didn't flunk out. I had the best time at Ithaca. And I continued to work at Cornell because I was involved with the Gilbert and Sullivan Society up in Cornell. That was a very influential body of work.
Well, while you're there, I want to mention David Green. And David Green says that he's been one of your best friends since your first Gilbert and Sullivan show, The Gondoliers, in 1962.
That's right. That's right. Yes. And we're still best friends. I mean, I'm sure you've run across this storyline, with other people that you've interviewed. But when you meet people in the theater, and I have my theory about this, but when you meet people in the theater and you're acting on stage with them, you can become friends, and that friendship lasts, or has the potential of lasting. I have an idea of why that is.
I'd like to hear it.
My idea is that when you have here's the analogy. If you only have one eye, you don't actually see things in depth. You see things in one perspective, and when you open your second eye, you actually can get dimension, a certain amount of dimension. When you meet somebody and you are an engineer, let's say, and you meet them in the context of being engineers together, and that's it, you only see one side of them. You only see that, and your friendship with them is constrained to your relationship within that framework. But when you're on stage with somebody, you meet as characters. And when you meet as characters and you relate as characters, it's like another perspective. It's like that second eye opens.
Well, the next question is, did you two share a dressing room?
Ah, that's a good question. I don't remember. I'll tell you who I do remember sharing a dressing room with. And it was my second Broadway show was the Rothschilds. And that was a big, big thing for me. And as I'm sure you know, because I think maybe we talked about Hal Linden. And
Hal Linden, yes.
I shared a dressing room with Chris Sarandon and the two other boys, Alan Grouet and David Garfield, with whom I went to Cornell. David did. And Chris and I became best friends and remained so, pretty much remained that way. And it had to do with the fact that we were on stage as brothers. We were behaving towards each other as brothers. Well, we took that off stage and behaved as brothers.
That's
why not?
When did you, or how did you forge out a path for pursuing work outside of college as an artist, as an actor? What were the early stages for you? When I came to New York, it was backstage. Was that in place at that time as well?
It was.
What was the career path that you took in terms of the connections that you made just starting out?
I must say I had a rather unusual, had nothing to do with backstage or any connections that were normal in those days. Because of the Gilbert and Sullivan connection, David Green, who was on the phone, David Green found a place where we could do summer stock and do Gilbert and Sullivan up on Cape Cod. And it was run by Oberlin. It was the Oberlin Gilbert and Sullivan Theater on Cape Cod. And a bunch of us went. And we auditioned. They know the artistic director came and auditioned us at Cornell. I was at Ithaca at the time, but they grabbed me. I came up the hill and did the audition, and we all went. And then I was there for 2 summers. And the second summer, a young man whose name you may know, his name is John Lithgow.
I think I've heard of him.
Yeah, he's a very, very short guy.
Yes.
I hope you're not listening, John.
I hope he is.
I hope he is. I do think he is.
No, amazing talent.
John and I worked together that second summer, and his dad was Arthur Lithgow, and Arthur Lithgow ran the McCarter Theater in Princeton, and he said to me, "When I graduate, you got a job at the McCarter." Well, as it happened, I graduated and went to the McCarter and spent a year at the McCarter. And that's where I met my first professional mentor, who was George Hearn.
Wow.
And George was the star of the shows at the McCarter at that time. And there were other wonderful actors, and I could, name them.
David told me to ask about Gibson and Timmy.
Gibson, is that David Green talking?
Yeah.
He's talking about Timmy Mayer. Timmy Mayer was one of the young Harvard type directors who was up at Highfield at the time, and Gibson was the artistic director. I don't know what else, to tell you. We're beyond there now in talking about, thanks, David, but no thanks.
Okay.
But what I had intended to say was that, what had I intended to say?
Well,
your turn. So I worked with George for that year and others who were wonderful. And then I came into New York, figuring I'd spend the summer doing one thing or another, maybe going up to Highfield again. I didn't know, maybe taking some summer stock activity, looking up at Backstage Magazine and doing some auditions. Well, I did do that. I went to the Backstage Magazine and there were 2 open calls. One of the open calls was for Fiddler on the Roof, the national company. And one of the open calls was for Man of La Mancha, the national company. And I auditioned for them both. And I got them both. And interestingly, the offer from Fiddler was for an understudy to Muttle. And the offer for La Mancha was for an understudy to Quixote. I was 24 years old. They were offering me an understudy to Don Quixote and to play Dr. Carrasco. And I thought, oh, wow, I'm taking that one. So I took that one. Only found out later that that Fiddler had made a mistake and they had intended to offer me Muttle. My complete, I can't imagine, what if I had taken that one?
It's very interesting. I don't know. Did you know Louise Quick?
Well, that's a familiar name.
She was a dancer. She worked with Bob Fosse. She was a Bob Fosse dancer.
Okay.
But she auditioned for Hello Dolly and Sweet Charity on the same day. And she got both.
Oh, man.
And she thought, do I want to work with Gower Champion, who she loved, or Bob Fosse, who she loved? And she went with Bob Fosse. And of course, it paved her entire career path. And it sounds like the same thing happened with you as well.
Exactly the same thing. I mean, so many of these moments in time where you have to make a decision and you go this way, you go that way. And I've heard a lot of actors talking about that very thing. The moment I made that decision, my life changed. Well, that's what happened to me. I mean,
let's go back there for a moment. What were some of, the obvious is there, but beyond the obvious, what were some of the major changes that happened in your life? I know that you made your Broadway debut in Man of La Mancha. Your parents, were they there for your opening night?
I believe they were, yeah. Yeah. They were very supportive from the moment they made the change, because my parents were extremely loving people. And encouraging and supportive. I was very fortunate, I guess. I mean, I can point to a lot of things for which I feel fortunate. That's one of them. And I miss them terribly. I think about them all the time, miss them terribly. What was the question?
About that decision opening on Broadway.
Their opening night, yeah.
What were some of the major changes that happened in your life as a result of the choice that you made with Man of La Mancha?
Well, when I made the choice of Man of La Mancha, when I didn't have an agent at the time, those jobs came out of off a Backstage magazine, and I went in there. I didn't have an agent when I was at McCarter, so I negotiated. I took their offer, went on the road, and while I was on the road, I got contacted by an agent. And let's let her name be not mentioned, because what happened was shortly after I was with them for a while, and then when another job. Oh yes. I was hanging around, going to auditions in New York, and the role came, and Dr. Carrasco became available in the Broadway company, and the La Mancha company called my agent and said, "We want Tim to go into the Broadway company as Carrasco." not the understudy, because we have somebody else doing that, but the agent said, well, no. How about, and mentioned the name of another actor they were handling, whom they would rather give the job to. The casting associate at the La Mancha company called me directly and told me what had happened, what had transpired. I was floored. I mean, I was just totally floored. And I said, well, I'm not going to stay with that agency. I want the job, I told them. I want to do La Mancha on Broadway. So they hired me for that show.
I have to ask, because I'm curious. Obviously, you confronted this agent.
I did.
And what was the reaction? Of course, we're not going to mention the name for all the right reasons. But what was the reaction? And were you able to get another agent shortly after that?
I did get an agent. The reaction, I mean, there was a flurry of how could you? Well, we just thought, you know, that sort of thing. And I did get another agent fairly soon after that. I ended up having to pay the original agent for the extent of the contract. In other words, I wasn't using that agency. Another agent was handling me, but they weren't taking any commission.
Yes, I've been down that path.
I had to pay the commission to the first agent.
Well, that brings up another interesting point when it comes to, you've had this phenomenal career, stage, screen, television, everything. How much of it has been proactive in terms of what you have pursued, and how much of it are because of the connections that you've made along the way? When it comes to agents, managers, and those of us who've been down the path know of which we speak, sometimes agents and managers are not necessarily making the right decisions for you. It's true, it happens. But how proactive were you, or are you, in terms of how your career unfolded?
Well, I mean, without putting too fine a point on it, I've always been happy with my agents. I haven't really had any issues that warrant, you know, me spending time with you complaining about them. No. You know, they would send me up for things. On the other hand, I would hear about things from you know, from friends and from producers. You know, you make friends along the way, and they call you again. But I mean, I think I've been fortunate that I haven't had to take anyone to court. You know, I've nothing. I can't say I have any complaints. You know, it's been an adventure. That's what it's been, because you go from one thing to another. You know, with those periods of unemployment in between. And then, of course, and we'll get to it, I'm assuming I came up with all of a sudden it occurred to me, I was doing a lot of readings and workshops and stuff like that. And I these new shows that I was loving doing, and then they weren't going anywhere. And that's then the engineer in me came out. And, I said, well, we can solve this problem if we just... And so I drafted a kind of a project plan, and we created National Music Theater Network.
How did that get launched? How did that get off the ground? And what are I mean, is the mission statement from the very beginning something that has been the same since the beginning, or?
The mission statement hasn't changed in 35 years, even though I lost that company. Which is an interesting story. The mission statement is always a two-part program. The first part is evaluation, and the second part is promotion. So I could not have done anything. I couldn't have gone to square two if I hadn't had around me friends who were directors who said, "Sure, I will." All these directors volunteered, and I think there were about 8 of them initially, to form a small committee and decide how and what an evaluation program would be. If writers were going to send their works to us, what were we going to do for them? So we came up with an evaluation report form, 40-question form, with opportunities with short answer and opportunities for the directors to write longer descriptions of what they thought. Words that would be descriptive were encouraged. And we created this form, and then we said, we incorporated and sent out the word, if you've got a new musical and you want it produced, in addition to going to the agents and to the producers, send your work into us, and we'll see, and we'll evaluate it. We'll tell you what we think. With professional director, we'll evaluate it and tell you what we think of it. And this was intended really to help people who were writing musicals who weren't living in New York, who really didn't have access to the producing community, who maybe didn't have an agent, or coming right out of school. So we started getting submissions of new material. We would do the evaluations, send the evaluation reports back, and if both directors thought it was of a sufficient quality, it would go into our recommended works pile. And we would take that pile, and Timmy would go, how can we promote this? And so that's where the problem has always been, is to push a rock up the hill to get shows that we think are worthwhile to be produced, not in New York, because New York is a kind of stuffed market, but outside of New York in the regions. And that was the second part of the organization, which was promoting these works for development.
And how is that different from Main Street musicals and the work that you're doing with them now?
It's exactly the same. I mean, the form has changed. Everything is online now. We have a partner who an organization called accepted.org that hosts the evaluation program, and that operates pretty much the same way as it has. Although right now, I will confess that I could use some administrative help. And we are moving forward with a new plan to take some of these recommended works and move them into the college community. That because the colleges have the resources, have the personnel, have students who are interested in rubbing elbows with professionals and the creative teams who wrote those shows, because that would propel them a little bit more, introduce them a little bit more into the professional community, which is a good thing.
Now, obviously, there's nothing like live theater, but do you think that the pandemic has helped or hindered the work that you're doing in terms of your outreach with Main Street musicals?
But you're absolutely right. It first looked like a tremendous hindrance in terms of our ability to mount concert readings or stage readings of these new works in regional communities. But then in March, April, while I was down here in Maryland, thinking, well, what am I going to do with my time? It occurred to me that some of my early experience when I first moved to New York, I got swept up into something else. I got, because of a contact from the Highfield days, I got swept into the radio station, into a local New York radio station, WBAI radio. It's a Pacifica network station. And it's a listener-sponsored station. And the guys who swept me in were making radio drama. And for 7 years, we'd get together on a Friday night after my show, and we would make a radio drama, have the actors in, record sound effects, mix it all together. It was the most wonderful time. Really, it's wonderful fun.
And now, are these all original works that you're doing for the radio dramas? I know that, of course, during...
You're talking about back then?
Now, the work that you're doing now.
The work that I'm doing now is an adaptation of that experience. Instead of making a radio drama that is adapted from short stories and serializations of novels, I am making radio musicals using the demos that the writers have sent me to Main Street, using those as the musical portions because they're very well recorded. And I just drop in, I do the adaptation and bring it down in size a bit because I've never felt that people can listen to the radio or even watch a screen for that long. So an hour is long enough,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, fortunately, our interview is not going to go longer than an hour. So
no.
When is he going to stop?
I am totally in agreement with you. There's a great moment in the movie Radio Days when they're sitting around listening to Charlie McCarthy, and they go, "How can you tell if his lips are moving or not?" One of my favorite movies. But scripts are being submitted to you.
Yeah.
If people want to get involved with Main Street Musicals, is it a not-for-profit? Can people make donations to you?
Yes, absolutely. I would say, look, I have an email address. And the easiest way to contact me is through, write tim@mainstreetmusicals.org or info@mainstreetmusicals.org. And I would also, because I'm so proud of the work that has been done, not just by me, but by directors whom I've recruited to make these radio musicals. We have 9 of them now made, and we've been sort of slowing down a little bit and thinking about, well, what else, how are we going to, move forward with this? But there's a place on the web. Let me see if this works. I don't know if this is a situation where you can share a screen.
We'll be able to do that. You can no, try it.
All right, hang on.
Okay.
Share screen. Oh man. You know what? I decided I don't want to do this.
Okay.
I'm just going to say that there is a website, mainstreetmusicals.com. Not .org, but .com, where there is an annex right at the top of the homepage. There's an annex, and inside the annex are, there are graphics, and you click on the graphics, you can hear the show.
Mm-hmm.
And as we turn them out, we'll put them in that very same place, the audio stages annex. And what I'm hoping is that these musicals can be distributed widely, and serve eventually as a preview of what the on their feet, put these shows up on their feet when theater does finally come back in whatever, a year from now.
Now, I know these are being done as radio musicals, but are you utilizing a format such as the one that we're on now, or Zoom, or is anything visual with these programs? Not
yet. We are, as of yesterday, we are in negotiations to move what we have, which is purely audio, which is why I called it audio stages, to have a visual component. I'm not ready to make any announcement about that yet, because we have it. First of all, it's a lot. It's actually expensive. Whereas the audio stuff, mainly because all the musical portions are done. Mm-hmm. People went into the studio already. Our writers went into the studio with their actors and did complete demos of the songs in their show, which we pick and then drop in dialogue. It's dropping in the dialogue is fairly cheap. Mm-hmm. You get an engineer, you get 5 actors, and 2 hours you're done. And
now,
then,
obviously, we're not there yet.
right.
Hopefully sooner rather than later. But are these musicals that you're creating, and are they strictly musicals that you're working on? It is Main Street Musicals. Do you have a division for just straight plays, or are you only interested in doing musicals at this point?
That's a good question, and the answer is we do not do straight plays, and we don't do children's theater. So the only stuff we are considering, I mean, we will do what do you call them? Like cabaret, where you don't have a plot, you know, through reviews. We'll do reviews, but we won't do children's musicals and what was the other thing? We don't do plays.
Yes.
We only do musicals.
Now, do you anticipate that these musicals at some point will have a life on an actual stage?
That's the purpose. That's the mission of the organization. We're not abandoning the mission just because we're coming up with a very interesting project and product. I mean, we used to do these festivals, you know, where people would come buy a subscription to a 3-show stage reading festival that, well, in most cases, an actor would produce at some local theater. That was, you know, that was essentially a money generating project, and we want to pay the actors what, $50 to come and do the reading. So there was money that exchange was exchanged there, but the purpose never changed. The idea of doing those shows in those communities was to get the people interested in seeing them up on their feet with costumes and sets and lights. And that's what we really wanted to do.
Well, I'm going to ask you a question that you don't have an answer for.
Oh, good.
But it's speculation, and maybe this is a discussion that you have had with your significant other. She is a doctor.
She is.
Or other people in the business. How do you anticipate that theater will come back?
Well, something tells me, and I don't know where this information or this instinctive sense comes from, but it's not going to come back quite the same as it left us. It's going to, it left us and instantly became an antique. I think there's going to be something else. I don't want to believe for a second that it would not require audiences to assemble live in a location, in a theater. I want that to stay because I think that the idea of there being a congregation to experience something that will affect them, affect their imagination. And that's what we're really talking about, the expansion and the utilization of imagination. That's the holy grail. We want people to be able to imagine life better than it is now, and informed by the writers who write these plays in terms of the direction in which life can be improved.
Well, speaking of the writers, there was a time earlier in both of our lives when more intimate musicals did open on Broadway. I Do is a two-hander. The York Theater, I'm doing a benefit for them tomorrow night, and their main focus is doing musicals. They've done with huge casts, but they mostly focus on smaller scaled shows. Do you think that as we do come back to doing more theater, that we will find more intimate theater happening again?
Yes. And I think it's going to happen all over the country. Incidentally, Janet Hayes Walker was One of my favorite producers. I worked
Founder of the York Theater, for those who don't know.
Oh, yes, she was the founder of the York Theater.
Yes.
I mean, Jim Morgan, he's a god, in terms of what New York provides to its congregation.
Yes.
And now they're going through it and could use the money.
Absolutely.
They had a flood. I think your audience probably knows that.
We're going to talk about that in a moment, but I want to ask you, what's next for you?
Well, I mean, we have to stay hunkered down here until the pandemic ends. I mean, I'm in my 70s, not even in my early 70s. I'm in my later 70s. And I won't tell you how old my girlfriend is, but suffice it to say, we met in 8th grade.
Good.
And we're gonna stay safe is the primary goal.
I'm hearing that.
And then when this ends, we're going to figure out what options are available to us, and take something, I think, that will bring me back, me personally. I mean, Judy is still working. She works as a doctor. She works all day, every day.
And God bless her. Just Judy, God bless you.
God bless you, Judy.
Yeah.
But I want to get back into the center of activity. I want to restart whatever seems to have slowed down in terms of evaluation and in terms of promoting these works regionally, because I think the people out there are going to need something to uplift them and to entertain them.
Absolutely. Well, Tim, you've entertained me this afternoon. Our time is up because I don't want to go over an hour. We both agree on that.
You did.
But I want to thank you for your time here. I want to thank everyone who tuned in today. If you enjoyed the show, and I hope you did, please go to my website, richardskipper.com. Sign my guest book with your thoughts about the show. That helps to boost me in other markets. And I want to let everyone know that tomorrow marks the 100th birthday of Carol Channing, believe it or not. And Carol and I, we were very dear friends. I'll share this with you. So tomorrow night, I'm doing a benefit for the York Theater. For those of you who do not know, they just experienced some extensive damage due to a horrible flood. And you're not obligated to pay anything. Come and enjoy the show tomorrow night. I have Leroy Reams, Sandra Lee, so many people who worked with Carol sharing their stories. But if you're able to make a donation tomorrow night, please do. I also end all of my shows by telling everyone to go out and do something nice for somebody else without expecting anything in return. Go to your Facebook friends list. Reach out to the third name that pops up and reach out to them with a phone call. Not an email, not a text, not a private message here on Facebook, but a phone call. Let them know what they mean to you. As my dear friend David Friedman says, we're all in this together, but we're not in the same boat. So you don't know what someone else is going through right now. So take the time to reach out. And if you are able to make a contribution to mainstreetmusicals.org, by all means, do so to keep the wonderful work of Tim Jerome and everyone involved moving forward. And before we end the show today, Tim, I want to give you the final word. Anything that you want to expound upon that we talked about today that you want to build upon, anything that we didn't talk about that you wish we had, or just any message that you want to put out to everyone. And thank you for all the work that you've done over the years, currently, and moving forward.
Thank you, Richard. It was a wonderful pleasure to talk to you. You really, one could worry about being interviewed, like, am I going to remember my name? But
that's my issue.
Something to say. I would like to end my own participation in this wonderful interview by saying that we are going through two pandemics right now. One, the doctors are in charge of, and one, everyone else is in charge of. And that pandemic has to do with the political upheaval that we seem to be facing. Mm-hmm. And all I can say is we need to encourage our imaginations, and we need to share our thoughts We can't pick up a gun. We can't pick up a weapon and try and fight someone, because that goes nowhere. That leads nowhere. It is communication. It is understanding that wins wars, because wars end when adversaries reach understandings.
Thank you.
So just talk about it. Don't fight about it.
Thank you. And I hope you'll come back sometime.
I'd love to.
Thank you,
Richard. I really appreciate
you so
it.
much. Thank you.
Talk.
Goodbye, everyone. Make it a better tomorrow. Thank you.